Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Got Will today. Give everyone a few minutes here to join in, and then looks like we'll start with Chris's question in just a quick second here. So bear with me. Okay, so Chris, you got a question here. The branch for each step can process a list of entities with some parallelism. In our example, the input list could be a few hundred entities, and the follow flow steps call a remote service and then update the entities with results. Might this use of branch for each cause system trouble? And should we use run flow for lists instead? On the surface, that does sound like more of a run flow for list use case than it does a branch for each. Branch for each is really more about assignments and tasking than it is about creating parallel sort of synchronous behavior.
That was sort of my take after reading through the branching for each page, documentation page. Yeah, that page in particular, but it didn't explicitly say don't do this or that this is a user interface tool for interacting with multiple users at the same time, right? So, or allowing an individual user to be presented with several assignments all at the same time.
Right.
And so I found an example of it very recently, and I said, I don't think this is really the right way to do this. But then I couldn't explain why, but it seems to work. And I couldn't explain why we must not do it.
So the biggest thing I'll tell you is it gives the appearance of parallelism. It is not actually parallelism in the same way that run flow for list is actually running things in parallel, like on multiple discrete threads for you. Like it, even if like in a more simple example, like a normal branch and merge, like so this one appears to do three things at once, but at the end of the day, when the workflow engine runs, it just goes down path one to hit its point of sort of like pause and then goes to path two, then goes to path three. But because these are tasking and assignments through user interaction use cases, that lack of true sort of parallel processing isn't a problem. And that same pattern applies to branch for each, though we absolutely need to do a better job of cleaning up how to differentiate this one. It does say branching, and branching can mean, multi-threaded in a lot of contexts. But realistically, if you're talking about needing to batch up if you're doing a back office, you're doing some sort of automation use case, which really just means something without forms.
Right.
Or any sort of something that doesn't have like human in the loop, then run flow for lists is going to absolutely be the best way to do that. Because for one, branch for each doesn't actually do parallelism, and it doesn't give you any control. You can't, even if it did, but it doesn't give you the level of control run flow for list does, since run flow for list allows you to determine the number of concurrent sort of processes you're going to ask the workflow engine to complete for you.
That was something else that stood out to me, is that run flow for list allows me to fiddle with how much concurrency.
Exactly.
And some amount of being able to manage what it consumes. Now, you did point out, though, that it would go as far as it could with a step and then potentially start another step. So one of the reasons why this actually got adopted is that the simplistic implementation might have been like a simple loop. The simple loop is going to call a, excuse me, a web service. Get the result, do an update. But that web service might possibly have, you know, a reason that it's, you know, it's going to take a couple of seconds to get back to you. And I think what the developer was hoping is that while it's waiting, that the flow engine would actually go ahead and start up a second iteration. And I don't know if that's actually true, or because of the, you know, imposed weight of waiting on a REST service call, that it would actually start up a second process, or does it actually stop and wait, and whatever he thought he saw as parallelism is basically a mirage.
Yeah, it does not. Yeah, it will each, like the flow, each flow could be considered a thread. I mean, this isn't literally true necessarily. But you could think about each flow execution as being a thread. So when a REST step is hit, that thread pauses until it's completed. So what you like, something with run flow for lists, let me just put one on the canvas just so we have the properties panel to refer to. Just a minute here. Flows for list, something like this.
Oh, I like that organization. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So here, like, let's look at the most common one, async and wait. So here it'll do 4. So let's assume you've got a variable response time for the API. Now, if you're, that means it's going to try to do 4 simultaneously. But each of those 4 queues, basically what it does is it creates 4 queues in your thread jobs, which would have some sort of naming convention like this, right? Where you'd have increment after the queue number here, or the queue name. And it's going to just dump, it's going to basically divide the collection by 4, put all of those into 4 different queues, but each queue is handled single threaded, but independent of one another. And so while a slow API call will cause that queue to back up, it won't affect the other queues. But like with this setting, async and wait, this step waits for all of those queues to complete before moving forward. So that slow call would back this one up. But this is the most common example we see because there is some batch processing requirement that once complete, we want to do some downstream changes to. So it wouldn't say like, oh, there's a slow one here, I can now launch another one while I wait for that to reply. It will wait for each thread to complete, each flow to complete, no matter how slow the call is, assuming that call doesn't time out. But it can run 4 in parallel, each of which is sandboxed from a performance standpoint from the others.
I think that matches what, you know, these properties tell me to expect, right? So that's why I, you know, kind of saw it and thought, well, that looks like a run flow for list application to myself, and for exactly these reasons. If someone had, for example, my coworker who is using that branch for each step, how is that going to compare in terms of behavior to the run flow for list? Is it actually going to do one at a time in spite of the appearance?
It probably will. I don't know that with certainty. I'd have to probably do a little bit of black box test, but I think that it will probably process each one in order, because it's waiting to get to some kind of store event before it moves to the next one in the same way the normal branch is. It's going to run. Yeah.
And the store event, sorry, and that store event would be, for example, when it encounters an assignment, says, hey, let's file this off. I got, you know, this assignment. We have to wait for this user to get to it.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
And we've historically seen some weird issues with these sometimes, where certain use cases there might be like a the ability to bypass this, right? So like on path 1, it'll check some value. And if that value is false, it will bypass the assign form and go right to the end step to give you this more dynamic, pathing. And I think those issues are all handled, but there were some squirrely bits where, it is not explicitly tagged as such, but its only job is really to allow you to have like a quorum type tasking, right? Where you could have multiple users, multiple assignments wait for users to complete, because normally with our assignments, like if you send them to a group, the first user in the group completes that for all the others, right? So that's really its use case, and it's either static here or dynamic here, but it is tasking and it is running sequentially under the hood.
Okay.
So long story short, I would advise your developer to use run flow for list and probably async and wait, and then see what it does to the performance characteristics of the flow that they're using.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, to my eye, it looks like that was intended for assignments, but nothing about the, creating of the flow on the canvas, and nothing in the help page explaining it seemed to say this is really only intended to be used in the context of handing out assignments, and should not be, and that you should be using a run flow for list for that kind of a purpose instead.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that.
So now I can kind of offer my feedback that no, a real expert says that at very best, you're getting the same as an ordinary loop.
Yeah, we should ask a real expert for their feedback, I think, just to be certain. But yeah, I'd advise run flow for list and see.
Very good.
All right, thanks, Chris. All right, and sorry, I didn't mean to unmute you, Redley. Go ahead, sir. What you got?
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Again, yeah.
Awesome. I do have a few questions. I hope they don't, none of them be terribly long. Can I share my screen? Would that be okay?
Oh yeah, sure. Let me make you a panelist. Okay. Remember, these are recorded, and also share what you will at your own discretion.
Okay, I'm back. So I have a assigned form, and it has 4 or 5 active form flows that run on startup. Now, I think they're running because one of them is just a test that throws a pop-up, and you can see that pop-up does pop up. But I have nothing over here in my list of things that are running. Any thoughts?
I'm sorry, Riley. None of the pop-ups are running?
No, none of the on startup active form flows.
Okay.
They appear to be running because one of them just throws a pop-up. Like I was just testing. Like, okay, is this actually running? And so I open the form and the pop-up shows up.
Okay.
But I have nothing over here on the left that I can drill in and debug those flows because I'm having some performance issues. But I'm not seeing any of the active form flows that I think are running. They're not over here showing me that they're running.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, so let's look at your form real quick.
You want me to get out of debug or?
Yeah, please, like actually in the editor.
Okay.
And yeah, so just find one of your on start flows.
Sure, we'll just look at the very simple one. Startup test. Do you want to see how it's configured or do?
Yeah, scroll down to the, let's just see, scroll down to the very bottom here. So run at startup is blocking. Okay. For outcomes. Really quickly, I'm just gonna make a super simple test flow just to see, make sure my debugger shows this. Or if it just you see the pop-up, but it doesn't show in the debugger, right?
Right, the pop-up shows on the screen, but the flow that's running that pop-up doesn't show that it ran.
In the debugger specifically.
Right, in the debugger.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, because I want to troubleshoot some other active form flows and I can't get to them.
The pop-up shows, I see rule flow showing underneath. Any chance that you let's just do something silly for me. Close out of
Okay.
every, go back to the main studio for me.
Okay. Okay.
And go ahead and just, can you just do like a hard refresh for me? Like open up Chrome Developer Tools,
Sure.
you know, right click the refresh icon and like clear cache, hard refresh. Yeah.
Okay.
Then just go run your test again.
Okay.
This was working previously, right? You've seen the active form flows running before?
This is a
Or-
copy of a form.
Oh,
in,
okay.
In the original form, it works fine. And I even switched it because it was originally a in-session form. I switched it to an assigned form in that original flow. So it all works fine. I
You
get
copied this, you copied the step or you copied the flow?
I copied, well, I copied the flow and then I copied the form. So we're looking at travel request initiator form version 2, and we're in flow travel request flow version 2. So let's do that. Nope. You can see I got the pop up here, but I have no startup test flow over here.
I'm gonna copy this step. And what version are you running right now?
832. 832.
It's interesting that I only see it showing. It's over here on my own thing trying to I mean, I think you're definitely doing, I don't think you're doing anything wrong here,
Okay.
right? This is some kind of, you've hit some kind of bug, almost certainly.
Of course.
Why that's happening, I don't know at the moment. I bet if we got access to your database, we could quickly recreate this in support. Like if we can get a database backup from you. This is just, you know, maybe there's some weird behavior when you copy a flow or you copy a form step in a flow that causes this to break. You know, that causes some kind of dependency to get unlinked or something, like at least from the debugger's perspective,
Okay.
something like that.
Because when I copied the form and then I went in to modify the flows in that copied form, they all ended with a bracket 1 bracket, right? So it's like it copied all the active form flows with it.
It would. That's expected.
Okay.
Right. It's those things are private. They're like
Right.
attached to the form. So there's probably just some kind of miss there. So I think this one's probably best for us to just troubleshoot and support together. But I don't think there's nothing you're like doing wrong, right? Because it works on other forms, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there's some kind of oddity here with copying things or something.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah, please.
So this is a what is this? A flow execution extension. So I have all my states.
Okay.
And I have an initiate state, which I'm starting with. Now in my flow, I don't set the state to start with. And then what I have happening is, let's look at one of these here. In my process view here, I have duplicate initiate states. I'm not really sure how that's happening. You see one of them, it's not always the first one that's kind of blank or empty. Sometimes it's the second one and the first one has all the data, but regardless, I have two.
Now, is initiate the initial state in your expected states?
It is.
And is there, do you set the state on the flow that creates the case?
Not the initiate one. I don't set initiate.
So, okay, so set up travel request process folder. Can you go to that?
Yeah.
Are you using simulation behavior on this thing?
I am.
Or is that just a that's just a warning?
It's because I have the same prefix on two different workflows. That's the warning that's thrown there.
Okay, so useful. So do it, and you just hit your form. And now it's every time it shows initiated, or it's intermittent?
It does. Yeah, it's every time it gives me a second one.
This on the bottom. Is initiate marked as the start state on the state settings? It is, yes.
Yes, you're saying in this flow here, here.
Yeah, initiate. Can you edit initiate really quick? I think there's like a checkbox for initial state, right? Or order is 1.
Should that be, is it a 0 based? Should it be 0 or 1?
I don't know.
I wonder what draft is. I didn't even think to look at the.
Let me create one really quick and I'll just
draft,
see what it
draft is
defaults
2.
to.
So at least looks like it
Anything's
matches
possible.
the integer here on the screen.
Look into my. Add state. Okay. Let me add a case really quick. Okay, so case editor started is order 1. Okay. Start state. Go edit your initiate again. Interesting. It doesn't have start state. The case one has a thing called start state. There's a checkbox named start state on it, which is right above closed state.
Yeah, and this is.
See, I see that on my folder, my flow execution extension as well.
Oh.
Can you? Is it? Hold on. Let me add another state.
Everything in there, right?
Edit start state save. If I edit another one, no, it still shows me start state.
Yeah, and
of course
I added another one as well. I did my second one. I don't have a start state.
I'm gonna assume. I'm gonna assume we haven't added that setting between 8.3 and 8.5, which was what I'm running on my local. To your setup process folder step for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and go ahead and just deselect save flow data.
Okay.
And try to run this again. I'm just guessing here, just to be clear to everyone on the call, but I just want to exclude this as a possibility.
Look at that. So we just have it the first time.
Check really quick if I can recreate this on 8.5. Blah, 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 blah. Create a flow. I'm going to put a I've built so many ugly forms on all these lunch and learns. It's incredible. Fine to administrate. Okay. And set a process folder, step pick current folder, save flow data is true, use extension data, is the case I just created. Switch text. One, and I have state on mine. But that seemed to fix it for you, oddly. Well, maybe it's fixed in 8.5, but yeah, basically that save flow data is allowing you to have a restore point. It's not actually doing anything for you.
Okay.
Nothing that you actually need, I don't think. So you can safely leave that deselected, I think.
Awesome. Okay. Great. Let's solve that. Thank you, Will.
Is that everything?
It is. Yep.
Oh,
I appreciate
okay,
it.
great. Yeah,
Thanks.
you bet. I'll go ahead and move you back to a normal. Can't do this anymore. Maybe you'll have to do it, Caitlin. You guys have like stolen all my permissions. I can't move Radley back to a participant anymore. He used to be able to.
I'm not sure what's happening with that. Because now it wants me to remove. Okay. Got it.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for us today? Don't have any queued up yet. Hey, we're right at 12:32. Look at that. Oh yeah, sure. Oh, go ahead, Chris. What you got?
So yesterday we opened a case to explore one sort of a tricky problem that we had. It turns out that we had a couple of examples of people in production working with stale data.
Mm-hmm.
And the pattern that emerged is that the way that this could happen is that one of them finished doing the part one of the work on node 1, but then somebody else opened it on node 2 and did not observe the work that actually was saved back at node 1.
Mm-hmm.
So one proposed resolution here is to disable the entity caching on that entity.
Okay.
Or which seems like that as best as we can sort of second guess it, it would simply mean that when the user was starting up on node 2, they'll have to do a quick database query, and we can't understand why that would be a problem in terms of performance for us, because it's one user asking for one record by its primary key. But that kind of brought us to the question of, well, when do I want to have the caching going? What would be the use? I mean, it's on by default.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of what we do, we might actually be well served to turn it off. But then it's sort of like, I don't know of any guidance for when I would actually want that on.
So we're talking about local data structures,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have a ton of data in these tables, I guess. So you're not worried about repetitive hits to the database to query this data?
I've been telling people
Mm.
that I believe our SQL Server is idle in spite of their apparent, the decisions server in production appears to be slow to a lot of people, but I am very skeptical, but no one can see it per se from just looking at CPU usage or looking at memory usage or even looking at the database server. And I would be shocked if the database server is even taxed to half its capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There could be something to that. This is a bigger conversation. You know, we identified and fixed as recently as like 7, 8 plus a lot of undiscovered slowness that's in the way the web UI is rendered, in terms of how things can get locked or the amount of data that gets sent down to the client unnecessarily for a customer who had a lot of concurrent users on dashboards with reports. And it had the same thing. There was little CPU or memory overhead, and yet using some other sort of monitoring tools like Datadog, we were able to see some slow calls. One thing that we could do, not on this call together, but if we could get some access to your IIS logs, we could work together to pull some, use Log Lizard, which is like it's like a query language for logs, that we could run some of those same queries against it and see if we see slow calls to certain like folders in there. That might confirm or deny some of the things that your people are complaining to you about. I'm not actually answering your question yet. I'm just saying there might be something there, and there could be, something for us to explore through the support channel together.
Maybe so. I have been telling people that December is coming, which means that our ability to update production is coming to a stop. That also means that we are absolutely going to kick off our upgrade to Decisions 8 for exactly these kinds of reasons. So I'm sort of looking at right now the project of trying to replace our servers and actually stand up and step up to Decisions 8 as approach the big thing to wrestle with that's coming up. And so I'm probably not excited about fiddling with the logs when we're probably just going to go to 8 anyway.
Sure.
But the
Something
question,
to keep in mind. But
yeah, I mean, so I've been telling people that I have reports that there are important changes there in the 7 and 8 releases that seem to address some of the problems that we have. Exactly how much mileage we get from it is hard to tell, but clearly we want to get to that. I think we want to get to that point before we try to seriously litigate, well, what else do we need to do, or if anything else needs to be done. But kind of gets me back to my original question, though, of what in a multi-node system, what would make caching worth our while?
Well, it is just the reduction of the database activity, right? So it's the expected behavior is that when an object that is cached is updated, of course, it saves that change to the database, assuming you're saving the change in the right way, which it sounds like you are, because you're seeing the database data update, right?
Right.
What it should do is send that ID using like this peer communication service. It sends the ID of the object that was updated to the other server, and it tells it to drop it from cache and refresh it. That's the way that's the way caching in clusters is intended to operate. The benefit is just that you deal with the local copy, but each node in a cluster has its own copy that changes in 8, where there's an actual like Redis server which owns the cache data now. So there are opportunities for it to get out of sync, but the win is that you reduce the amount of needed database activity to run flows that deal with these objects. But if you're not seeing, if you are on an older version, you have issues with data, you're in a cluster, and the data, and you're not doing, and you don't think that there's a performance penalty to doing that, you disabling caching means that every time we need the data, we'll go to the database, which means that for that particular object type, the nodes in the cluster won't be keeping separate copies in memory. How to gauge that performance impact is a question I don't have a good answer for you too.
Well, and I am honestly looking towards applying it perhaps with just a broad stroke, a couple of places as I see what happens before we get into the freeze. One of the motives behind that is I do see a peer-to-peer cache service being near the top of the report of things using time, which strikes me as well. If the benefit is questionable and it is actually at near the top of what's running, maybe what I want to do is trim that. That's sort of what brought me to, well, then, why do I need caching? And if it's about trying to avoid a database call, which I have good reason to believe is going to be quick enough for what we're doing, it's getting harder to see the values to it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think I think your thinking there makes sense to me.
One of the other things that emerged from that call is that we inspected the XML for on at least 2 of the nodes. There are a total of 3 nodes, and the XML configuration. And apparently there's a spot in there to declare who your peers are, which is in our example empty. So I don't know if that means that, for example, node 1 doesn't know how to tell node 2, hey, this ID is now stale.
Should see errors in the logs there. If that's the case. Well, you should see like peer communication errors of some sort.
Okay, so that would be something to look for. Because I guess I was a little unsure about that, the need of that setting. In other words, why, in the configuration file, I sort of scratched my head about, well, why is that? If that's not there, then that means, caches are in trouble. On the other, so there ought to be these error messages is what we want to go look for. As opposed to, because apparently there's a table that actually they seem to have registered with each other that, I'm at this IP address, you're at that IP address. And that would be how they find each other. So as I sort of scratched my head, if that table is there, but the configuration file is empty, I would have thought that perhaps the caching system would have borrowed from what's stored in that table over there.
It should, but maybe there's multiple records or something's wrong with the IPs. You should see tons of errors here. So you might just have a cluster configuration error, or we need to validate your cluster configuration with support and make sure that it is properly configured, which it may not be. And that would also lead to, if the cluster is not configured correctly, you should, peer service, that peer communication service, that is the cluster communication service. And that could absolutely lead to data inconsistency between the nodes if they can't appropriately send events to one another.
All right.
It might be useful just to get a support call scheduled to just do a sort of a cluster config validation, which we're of course happy to do.
Yeah, I'll have to get my administrator to work with us on that. It seems like that would be worthwhile. If just kind of looking at my calendar and thinking that's hopefully something he can fit in time to perhaps fix it if it needs fixing before winter gets here.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably the first thing. Instead of making any material change, the workflows would be to validate the cluster config. And then
Well-
validate your test scenario again.
Well, the other thing the reason why I say I'm going to go at it with a sort of a broad brush is that there are whole classes of entities that I am confident caching them doesn't really bias anything except the chew up memory.
Sure, that right. That is probably.
So, I'll hesitate on some of the other ones, but I think for the ones that I know that for what they are, then maybe like some of them are constrained to just sort of batch operations even. It's sort of like, well, then why am I filling you into a cache if I'm going to be interacting with a database anyway?
Here, yeah, no, that's actually a really valid question or concern.
All right, that helps me out, makes me feel a little more sane.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, anybody else got anything for us today? Attendees list has been shrinking as we move closer to the end of the hour. So, last call. Alrighty. Okay, thanks everybody. We will
Thanks,
see
Will.
you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.